we were asked to think of the first scene we saw of Guts in the Berserk manga, most of us will think about the infamous tavern scene in the first chapter, when Guts bisected one of the thugs with his dragon slave. However, this was not the first interaction we saw of him. When we think of this tavern scene, we overlook the very first scene we saw of Guts in the first 4 pages. This is understandable, because after all that happens in this scene is Guts is seen having intercourse with a girl, she transforms into a monster, and Guts blows her head off, and he walks off. Not much, right? It is easy to dismiss that the only purpose of this scene is to provide shock value, but I disagree. These first 4 pages are extremely dense, and it works as a great introduction to the world of Berserk. Going back to the first panel, so much is revealed to us. Firstly, what is Guts doing here? He is butt naked and he is sharing his body with another girl. A common complaint people rereading this page will say is that this action is very uncharacteristic of Guts. People holding this opinion will say that it is very unlike Guts to have sex with someone, considering that at this point in the story, he had gone through that ordeal with Casca. There are 2 objections to this position. The first is that at this point in the story, or for the whole of the Blackswordsman arc for that matter, Guts was at his very lowest and darkest point as an individual. During the Golden Age, Guts finally found something valuable, and after risking his life to protect a certain someone, he was stabbed in the back, and everything was taken away from him. After the eclipse, Guts was entirely self-absorbed, full of hatred towards the world, and the only thing in his mind was to get revenge, whatever means necessary. Considering all this, for him to have sex with an apostle, for the sole purpose of killing her, isn't, in my view, an inconsistency. Even if this action was to objectively be uncharacteristic of Guts, it can fall back on the fact that when Miura was writing these chapters, back in 1987, he hadn't planned the story that far ahead, and he hadn't intended on getting Guts and Casca together. When the first page is observed through a different lens, Guts being butt naked unironically provides a great deal of insight towards first-time readers. As a result of Guts not wearing anything, it permits us to observe the entirety of his body. We take note of his ripped and muscular back, along with his prosthetic iron hand, and above all, we can visibly see the scars across his whole body. This signifies the readers that this man has gone through some shit, and the following arc, the Golden Age arc, certainly proves this. Something else to take note of is that even though we can see his body quite visibly, we never have a clear view of his whole face. Each time his face is shown, we only see the side of it, or it is partly darkened out. It is a very difficult task to label Guts' character, but this suggests to the reader that Guts isn't necessarily a typical hero, and it's not a stretch to say that he looks like a villain here. This clouded reveal of Guts makes us wonder who he is, and what his true intention is. These 4 pages also foreshadow and represent a lot of the important elements which present themselves throughout Berserk. The first and most obvious one is sex. In Berserk, although it isn't shown as much as the other themes mentioned in this video, sex plays a large role by reinforcing the story's bigger themes and values. For example, the height of Guts and Casca's relationship is represented in the chapter Wounds, when the pair share intercourse, and the trauma Guts had is also shown through the way he was raped as a child. Specifically, rape is also used in certain parts of the story to showcase how monstrous some of the enemies are, such as with the trolls during the Millennium Falcon arc. The scene also establishes what type of an entity an apostle is. Apostles are consistently shown throughout the story, and this interaction gives the readers a sneak peek of their appearance and their personality. While the physical features of apostles greatly differ, upon transformation, most, if not all apostles, look unrecognizable compared to their human base form. This factor is shown to a high degree, especially in these pages, since this apostle transforms from a seemingly beautiful girl into this terrifying monster. This is a big contrast, even when compared to how later apostles look compared to their base form. As for an apostle's personality, this scene also demonstrates the violent desire for bloodshed most apostles hold, with the way she remarked at Guts when she grabbed him. A quick fact: the apostle shown here is the same apostle that killed Caucus during the eclipse. It isn't explicitly mentioned in the manga, but the pair look almost identical when compared to side by side. The last and most subtle theme represented in these 4 pages is mistrust. This is all just based off of these 2 panels. When a scene of 2 people sharing intercourse is shown without any context, some people would assume that to some degree, the pair have some emotional connection or a certain level of trust with each other. But here this assumption is completely dismantled when the apostle reveals her true self. She tells Guts that he has fallen into her trap, but he hits back by telling her that the only one trapped is her. She believed she had successfully tricked Guts, but Guts had seen through her lies, and he never trusted her from the beginning. This action is important because it establishes a key characteristic of Guts, which evolves throughout the story: his mistrust. As mentioned in my first video, Guts' inability to trust others is a vital part of his character. This display is effective because specifically in these early parts of the story, as mentioned earlier, Guts was undoubtedly in one of his darkest and mistrustful times of his life, when this mistrustful side of him was emphasized over and over again. And not only is this side of him represented repeatedly, this mistrustful side of him is also something which evolves throughout the story. A large portion of the meaningful moments in Berserk are the times when Guts opened his heart out to accept others, and there are many examples of this. And for this to be shown right from the first scene acts as a groundwork for how this important part of him in fact changes. These themes represented in the first 4 pages all work together as a gateway to a great introductory chapter to an amazing series.